Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. Investment bank trader brags about how easy it is to manipulate precious metals. Let's explore. For those of you familiar with my channel and my views on manipulation, you may be somewhat surprised to hear me discuss this type of story. But nonetheless, it is wholly inconsistent with what my views have been about manipulation. Precious metals, I kind of categorize them in two different sections. Essentially, there is what I refer to as macro and micro manipulation. And macro manipulation is, I think, much different than micro manipulation. Micro manipulation is something that I believe does happen, where essentially there is manipulation of prices for selfish gain within any organization, a financial institution. And this is what we're going to be talking about here today, whereas macro manipulation is essentially a cabal or a conspiracy within the banks and financial institutions to suppress the price of silver or gold downwards. And we're going to be talking about micro manipulation in this article. First, we have a story, a very small blurb here from Kitco News. It talks about investment bank traders bragging about how easy it was to manipulate these prices in the precious metals markets. The trial of two precious metal traders who used to work for Bank of America's Merrill Lynch unit showed one of them, Edward Basis, bragging about how easy it was to manipulate prices. And this kind of goes into a rough overview, but we're going to look at it deeper here momentarily. A vice president of analysis group, Maria Garibaldi, who studied exchange and trading data for prosecutors, when Basis was working at Deutsche Bank AG, he put out bids to buy 2,740 gold futures contracts valued at around $244 million over the course of 4.5 minutes. Incidentally, more than 98% were canceled without being filled, she said. As the prices rose in favor of the trader's, Basis sold his 170 contracts valued at $15,172,500. Garibaldi told jurors on Wednesday, bragging about what he had done. Basis said, "That shows you how easy it is to manipulate it sometimes." Cedric Chanu and James Vorley, who received the messages, were sentenced last month a year in prison, each for their convictions in 2020 on spoofing charges at a separate trial. So this is something that we've seen associated with JP Morgan, and now this trial is going on with Deutsche Bank. He added that, "I screw the market around a lot." During another example, Basis and Posillo were working at Merrill Lynch, and Basis placed an order to buy 10 contracts of platinum, with 6 being filled at placement. Less than 10 seconds after Basis placed that order, Posillo placed an order to sell 205 contracts for $15,856,750, which is almost 90%. The price subsequently went down, and the rest of Basis orders were filled. Less than a second later, Posillo's sell order was canceled. And so that is pretty interesting indeed. There's an article from Yahoo Finance, originally harvested from Bloomberg, talks about it in forms of chat logs. And this gives us a little bit more idea because it gives us a time frame. And so, which makes us wonder if this is still happening now or if they could even get away with it today, because this was quite a long time ago. Edward Basis, we're talking about again here from Merrill Lynch. It was on the 28th of January 2009 when Basis was working at Deutsche Bank. He put out bids to buy 2,740 gold futures contracts valued at $244 million over the course of 4.5 minutes, according to Maria Garibaldi, vice president at an analysis group who studied exchange and trading data for prosecutors. More than 98% were canceled without being filled. So that was a manipulation to the upside. so they could profit from it when they sold. As prices rose, a fellow Deutsche Bank trader, Basis, coordinated with sold his 170 contracts valued at over $15.1 million. Garibaldi told jurors on Wednesday. So her evidence continued Thursday. It shows you how easy it is to manipulate sometimes, as we mentioned in the Kitco article, the quote from Basis. And James Vorley, along with Chuti and another trader, were sentenced to a year in prison each for their convictions in 2020 on spoofing charges at a separate trial. So there we go, jail time. That is what's needed. I'm glad to hear that jail time was given to these folks. And again, he screws around with the market a lot. He said in another message, Basis and fellow Merrill Lynch trader John Pasillo faced federal fraud charges for allegedly spoofing the futures market from 2008 to 2014. And there was an episode, as we referenced here, with Platinum that happened on August 9th, 2010. We both were working at Merrill Lynch. That day, Basis placed an order to buy 10 contracts of Platinum, with 6 being filled at placement, she said. Less than 10 seconds after Basis placed that buy order, Pasillo placed an order to sell 205 contracts for over $15.8 million, which was almost 90% of what was visible on the exchange order book, Garibaldi said. The price went down, and the rest of Basis' order was filled, she said. Less than a second later, Pasillo's sell order was canceled, she said. Garibaldi said employees in an analysis group put in about 3,000 hours studying data in this case over the course of several years, billing the government $1.2 million for its work. During testimony on Thursday, Garibaldi was asked by a defense lawyer to describe an order Pasillo placed on April 17, 2014, the so-called iceberg order, interesting, which is divided up into smaller limit orders to avoid disclosing how big it is, was for 20 silver contracts, which cover 5,000 ounces of the metal at $19.63 an ounce. That was about a half a cent less than the best offer in the market at the time. Despite this massive $1.9 million notional value, the difference we're talking about between Mr. Pasillo place and his offer to buy and the best offer to sell was $19.63.5 was $500. Pasillo's defense lawyer, Matthew Menchel, asked Garibaldi during cross-examination. That's right. And with the caveat, we don't know how many contracts were available at that price, Garibaldi said, adding later, under questioning from the prosecutor, that the price differential between the two sell orders only lasted for 1.6 seconds because Pasillo canceled his. In other words, that's some example of high-frequency trading. In opening arguments Tuesday, Basis defense attorney told the jury that once her client understood spoofing was illegal, he stopped doing it, and that nearly all of the conduct the government identified was before the enactment of the Dodd-Frank Act, which specifically prohibited spoofing. The next prosecution witness is expected to be Haranik Lakan, a trader who worked with Pasillo and Basis and is cooperating with the government. The case is U.S. versus Basis et al., and a different number there, in Chicago, Illinois. So it's very interesting. There's a couple of different aspects of this and nuance that we need to understand here. Screwing around with the market over something of a legal loophole, which was closed by the Dodd-Frank Act, apparently, which essentially invoked the racketeering laws that was famous under Giuliani back when he went after the mob. You heard me discuss and talk about that with my video discussing J.P. Morgan doing this. But what's happening here? Spoofing, and these things move the markets up and down. And literally within seconds this happens. So the manipulation of prices that are occurring are within this organization, separate from, obviously, the J.P. Morgan, because J.P. Morgan was not listed here. This is a continuation of probably this kind of sweep against different organizations, but we knew that Deutsche Bank had been doing it, and they were going to get charged, and prosecutions were going to be happening. And this is the story that has come from that. Are they doing it now? Possibly. Have they been caught? Well, no, because we've not heard about it in the news. I've not seen any story about manipulation, of any recent manipulation, and I'm very curious to see if it's still going on in this level. Now, there are manipulation across all commodities to some extent. Some of that may be somewhat legal. In fact, we know the Federal Reserve itself is manipulating the dollar. And we know that's occurring, whether good or for bad or for worse. Definitely not for the better. But nonetheless, that is causing the price of things to go up. Hence inflation. And but nonetheless, where does that leave precious metals? Well, that leaves precious metals back to their fundamentals. And that is the lesson here as we look at gold and silver over the course of a long period of time. They will survive no matter what happens, no matter how quickly the high frequency trades are, no matter how much manipulation there is, whether realized or perceived. We know in the end, precious metals do what they always have done, and that is to preserve our wealth against economic instability. And that's really the bottom line here, folks. That's what we do. We hold these metals to preserve our wealth over that period of time. And so it doesn't matter what the price does from day to day, although it is interesting to follow for sure and speculate even as to what's causing the price to go up and down. A lot of different factors. In fact, I would make the argument, as I have for years now, that natural market forces play a much larger role than what can happen in a split second in a high frequency trade of nefarious purposes. And so therefore, this is why I've never really been convinced of what I refer to as macro manipulation or price suppression between a cabal of different banks. Number one, everybody has their own self-interest at heart. You're not going to get people to come together and say, hey, in a conspiracy, let us conspire to keep the silver low, for instance. What good does that do them? It doesn't do them any good. They're not that long-sighted. It's not a threat to these bankers. Silver's not a threat to anybody, really, especially in the Western world. Well, maybe more so in the Western world than the Eastern world, but both gold and silver. They don't care about that stuff. What do they care about? The bottom line. Lining their own pockets. And what do they line their own pockets with? It certainly isn't gold or silver, unless they're savvy enough to see the value of the metals. But they see them as commodities. And so they work in that world as commodities. Most of these guys do. And I think for those of us that hold these metals, we're really the smart ones. We hold it. And we essentially, in a sense, have manipulated it, especially with the silver squeeze movement. And the premiums have been manipulated upwards. Although there has been some blurb in the price action at the very beginning of the silver squeeze movement as we know it today. But nonetheless, we know that in the end, the fundamentals are the what's going to carry us through, and that means wealth preservation through a long course of time to combat things like inflation and economic instability. And that is what we can hang our hat upon, and stand proud no matter what happens. But hey, just goes to show you how easy it was, at least from 2009 through 2014, according to the articles here. And so we'll see how it plays out. But again, I'm glad to read that there's been some jail time associated with these folks. It's about time. And fines should be increased, and they need to crack down on it. But nonetheless, it has very little effect on you and I unless we're buying literally within seconds of it going up to that particular point in time, and then it falls within that next couple of seconds or hour or whatever it is. Largely, we're not really affected by it. But it'd be nice to see real price discovery with these metals, but it may be these natural market forces that are hindering it more than anything. But that's the way the market goes. It is very fickle. It is very emotional. A lot of psychology in the markets, as I've talked about before. And that is what rules the day. For us, real money rules the day. Hence why we accumulate gold and silver. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Hope you found this video informative and entertaining. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch. And to encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.